would dismantle its missiles in Cuba, and the United States would publicly declare it would not invade Cuba. Additionally, the US secretly agreed to remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey, which were a similar threat to the Soviet Union. GAP-2S. The resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis was a turning point in the Cold War. It highlighted the dire need for better communication between the superpowers and led to the establishment of the Moscow-Washington Hotline, a direct communication link to prevent future crises. GAP-2S. The Cuban Missile Crisis remains a stark reminder of the dangers of nuclear brinkmanship and the importance of diplomacy in resolving conflicts. It was a close call that demonstrated the devastating potential of the Cold War and the resilience of human diplomacy in the face of existential threats. GAP-2S. The lessons learned from this perilous episode continue to resonate, reminding us of the crucial need for dialogue, understanding, and the relentless pursuit of peace in a world fraught with tension. The Vietnam War, a divisive conflict. GAP-2S. The Vietnam War was one of the most contentious and polarizing conflicts of the 20th century. Unlike the Cuban Missile Crisis, which brought the world to the brink of nuclear war, the Vietnam War would drag on for nearly 2 decades, leaving deep scars on the American psyche and altering the course of history. GAP-2S. It began as a fight against colonialism, with Vietnamese forces battling French colonial rule. However, after the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, the conflict morphed into a Cold War battleground. The country was divided into communist North Vietnam and anti-communist South Vietnam, setting the stage for a protracted and bloody conflict. GAP-2S. The United States, deeply committed to the policy of containment, sought to prevent the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. American involvement escalated after the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964, which led to the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, giving President Lyndon B. Johnson broad powers to wage war in Vietnam. GAP-2S. What followed was a grueling and controversial war marked by guerrilla warfare, heavy bombing campaigns, and significant civilian casualties. The conflict was not just fought in the jungles of Vietnam, but also in the hearts and minds of the American people. GAP-2S. The war sparked widespread protests and a powerful anti-war movement, with images of the conflict broadcast into living rooms across America. The My Lai massacre, Kent State shootings, and the Pentagon Papers further fueled public dissent and eroded trust in the government. GAP-2S. By 1973, the United States had withdrawn its combat troops, but the war continued until 1975, when North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon, unifying the country under communist rule. The legacy of the Vietnam War is complex and multifaceted. It raised profound questions about American foreign policy, the limits of military power, and the human cost of war. GAP-2S. The Vietnam War remains a poignant reminder of the devastating impacts of ideological conflicts and the importance of learning from history to avoid repeating past mistakes. It was a divisive conflict that left a lasting impact on all who lived through it and continues to shape our understanding of war and peace. GAP-2S. The lessons from Vietnam echo through the annals of history, urging us to carefully consider the implications of military intervention and the value of pursuing diplomatic solutions to global conflicts. Détente, a thaw in the Cold War. GAP-2S. As the Vietnam War was ending, the world started to change again. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, there was a period called détente. This was a time when the United States and the Soviet Union, who were enemies in the Cold War, tried to be less tense with each other. GAP-2S. During détente, they talked a lot to avoid a nuclear war and make the world a safer place. GAP-2S. One important thing that happened during détente was the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, or SALT. In 1972, they signed the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, which limited missiles. This was a big deal because it slowed down the arms race. GAP-2S. Another big moment was the Helsinki Accords in 1975. 35 countries, including the United States and the Soviet Union, met to talk about important things like safety, human rights, the economy, and science. This was a big step in making things better between the East and the West. GAP-2S. Not everyone liked détente. Some people thought it let the Soviet Union become too strong. especially in other parts of the world. Others thought it was necessary to avoid a nuclear war, Gap 2S. Even though it wasn't perfect, détente was a big change from the fighting of earlier years. It was a time when people had hope and tried to talk things out instead of threatening each other with war. Gap 2S, détente shows us that talking to each other is important, even when countries don't agree. It reminds us that we can find ways to work together, even when things are tense, Gap 2S. Even though the Cold War continued for many years, détente taught us valuable lessons about peace. It showed us that even when countries have different beliefs, they can still find common ground and create a safer world through talking and respect. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, a quagmire. Just as the world began to hope for lasting peace, a new conflict shattered these aspirations. In December 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, marking a significant escalation in the Cold War. The invasion was intended to support the struggling communist government in Afghanistan, but it quickly turned into a prolonged and bloody conflict. The rugged terrain and fierce resistance from Afghan guerrilla fighters, known as the Mujahideen, made the war a nightmare for Soviet forces. The United States, viewing the invasion as Soviet expansionism, provided substantial support to the Mujahideen, including weapons and training. This proxy war further strained US-Soviet relations. The conflict had devastating effects on Afghanistan, leading to massive civilian casualties and widespread destruction. It also drained Soviet resources and morale, contributing to the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan is often referred to as the Soviet Vietnam due to its costly and unwinnable nature. It serves as a grim reminder of the human and political costs of Cold War conflicts. This chapter in history highlights the complexities and tragedies of global power struggles, emphasizing the importance of seeking peaceful resolutions over military interventions. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan left scars that still affect the region and the world today, a testament to the enduring consequences of Cold War rivalries. The fall of the Berlin Wall, a symbolic end. As the Cold War dragged on, the world yearned for a sign of hope, a beacon of change. That sign came on November 9, 1989, when the Berlin Wall, the most potent symbol of the division between East and West, began to crumble. For nearly 3 decades, the Berlin Wall had stood as a stark reminder of the ideological battle between communism and democracy, separating families, friends, and a nation. The seeds of change were sown by the growing unrest in Eastern Europe. The people, tired of oppression and yearning for freedom, began to push back against their communist regimes. In East Germany, the pressure reached a boiling point. Protests swelled, and the calls for reform grew louder. The government's attempt to quell the unrest with concessions only fueled the desire for more significant change. Then, in a moment that would be etched in history, an East German government official mistakenly announced that travel restrictions to the West would be lifted immediately. Thousands of East Germans flocked to the wall, overwhelming the border guards. In a stunning turn of events, the guards, unsure of what to do, opened the gates. Scenes of jubilation erupted as East and West Germans embraced, danced, and celebrated their newfound freedom. People began chipping away at the wall, breaking it down piece by piece. The world watched in awe as the symbol of division was dismantled, brick by brick. The fall of the Berlin Wall marked the beginning of the end for the Soviet Union. It signaled a shift towards democracy and freedom in Eastern Europe, and paved the way for the reunification of Germany. It was a moment of triumph for the human spirit, a testament to the power of hope and the desire for unity. The images of that night remain vivid in our collective memory. The tears of joy, the hugs, the cheers. The fall of the Berlin Wall was not just the end of a physical barrier, it was the end of an era. It represented the triumph of freedom over tyranny, the victory of unity over division. It was a moment that changed the world, a moment that reminded us all that even the most formidable walls can be brought down by the unwavering spirit of the people. The fall of the Berlin Wall was a symbolic end to the Cold War, a beacon of hope for a brighter, more united future. The dissolution of the Soviet Union, a new world order. The fall of the Berlin Wall was a pivotal moment, but it was just the beginning of the end for the Soviet Union. The winds of change sweeping through Eastern Europe soon reached the heart of the Soviet Empire. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Union was grappling with severe economic stagnation, political unrest, and a growing desire for independence among its satellite states. Mikhail Gorbachev, the General Secretary of the Communist Party, attempted to reform the system from within through policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. These reforms aimed to modernize the Soviet economy and make the government more transparent. However, instead of stabilizing the nation, they exposed the deep-seated issues and accelerated its unraveling. As the Soviet grip loosened, nationalist movements gained momentum. The Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania led the charge, declaring their independence. The domino effect was unstoppable. Other Soviet